Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Welcome to the day 3 of South-South Forum on Sustainability. And today we have the theme about the community regeneration for alternatives. So how can we regenerate the community energy and to look for the alternatives? And we will look at different cases in Latin America and also Asia. And we have 4 speakers. And then the first speaker will be from Japan, Tomoya INYAKU. He works for the Safe Seas in Japan. INYAKU is a food democracy activist, researcher, and advocate. He worked in Brazil for 3 years and a half. His main concern is about GMO, including gene editing, seed policy, agroecology, food sovereignty, sovereignty, and also climate justice. And he will share his PowerPoint with us. Please.
Bonjour, good morning, everyone. I would like to thank you all for giving me this opportunity. My name is INYAKU. I am working mainly on the food issues in Japan. I would like to start with burning issues in rural area in Japan. What is getting more serious is the collapse of the infrastructure of rural society. Because of the free trade agreements, the market is filled with cheap imported foods. The production cost of many local farmers' crops exceeds the market price. Many villages may disappear because small farmers give up farming. Extreme weather destroy the infrastructure of rural area, but the government is reluctant to rebuild the broken infrastructures. An individual farmer can do nothing with this situation. What is worse, the government has been actively privatizing the whole public services, such as education, welfare, water supply, forest management, and even public seeds management. The food self-sufficiency of Japan dropped to 37% or less than that. The resistance is growing all over Japan, but nationalistic or racist reactions are also growing very fast in the big cities, and the extreme right group take hold of the central government and the big cities like Tokyo and Osaka. Mainstream media is controlled by the government, and the people's voices can hardly be heard. The government has been trying to privatize the public seed services. The Main Crop Seed Act was abolished in 2018. This act was to oblige all local governments to produce the seeds of rice, soy, and wheat for their local farmers. It was abandoned, although it has contributed to local food safety and diversity of varieties. This year, the government is trying to amend Plant Variety Protection Act, which protects the intellectual property rights of the seed companies by prohibiting farmers from selling registered seeds. The amendment of the act may affect farmers' rights in other countries. The Japanese government will spend $9 million to register Japanese seeds in foreign countries and to prevent local farmers from saving the registered Japanese seeds with the cooperation by the partner agency of the other countries or private agencies, international private agencies. Japan has been insisting to force UPOF 1991 to all TPP and RCEP member countries to ban seed savings. UPOF is an international treaty to defend plant breeder rights. Japan has developed a Sanchok Teikei model, which is similar to CSA, Community Supported Agriculture, or Farm-to-Fork strategy, which connects farmers with consumers directly. But once the public seeds service is privatized, that relationship may end. Because, for example, a private company such as Sumitomo Chemical intervenes in it. Their business model is to control farmers and consumers separately for their own purpose to sell seeds, fertilizers, and pesticides as one package. Sumitomo Chemical acts as a seed company and an agrochemical company, and as a grain trader at the same time. Monsanto, now buyers, Roundup, is in trouble. There are more than 85,000 litigations against Roundup, Bayer tried to settle them, but it won't go easy. Monsanto's herbicides, Roundup, is not working well. There are so many Roundup-resistant weeds everywhere, so that Monsanto tried to escape that trouble by mixing old herbicides, dicamba. Dicamba has become one more headache for Bayer now. But Sumitomo has been developing the next generation herbicides for Monsanto. Sumitomo Chemical may become a co-producer of the next GMO crops. Sumitomo Chemical also develops crops by gene editing, new GMO. It is fortunate that their business is not working so well. We need more resistance to stop this mad cooperation. We won, and we had difficulty because the journalism doesn't work well in Japan, but some celebrities wrote their concerns on Twitter, and this changed a lot. The bill was not discussed in the Diet this time. We have some more victories. 21 local governments enacted seed ordinance which protects public seed production after the Major Crop Seed Act was abolished. You can see the map. Almost half of the Japan is covered by this ordinance. Making school lunch organic, fostering local food ordinance have been gaining bigger public support, especially among young mothers. Mobilizing municipality is promising. We are winning, but we have to link one more big picture to this. What you see is the harvest of GMO soy in Brazil. The large-scale plantation of GMO soy is a social disaster as well as an environmental disaster. It pushes away the local peasant to urban cities. It kills soil, insect, microbiome, and everything except GMO soy. This is the toxic republic of soybean map. GMO cultivation contaminates the large part of the southern American continent. Modern Japan abandoned local agricultural development, especially soy farming, to concentrate its resource on militarization. 80% of soy consumed in Japan was imported from Northeast China and Korea until the end of World War II. After the war, Japan depends heavily on soy from the USA and recently from Brazil. With this policy, Japan will never develop its own agriculture. The Japanese government signed an agreement to support agricultural development project in the Cerrado area in September 1974 with the Brazilian government under severe military dictatorship. Cerrado is the richest savanna in terms of biodiversity in the world, and it is an important water source for Amazon forests. This project is called Protese, started in 1977 and ended 1999 for 3 phases. The Japanese government regarded it as miraculous success, although it gave serious social and environmental damages. The project is going on in 4 states called Mapitoba now, despite international opposition. This is, this is the soy road. Sorry. These lines are soy roads that cut Amazon forest to export soy to the EU, China, and Japan, and the brown area where the forests were destroyed. Soy roads lead to destruction. Recently, the Japanese trading companies have acquired the Brazilian companies to get soy from Brazil. As you can see, where they operate, the forests are gone. But soy import to Japan has been falling, and soy import to China has been expanding a lot recently. Japan has become less responsible for the destruction of Amazon forests? The answer is no. This is Marubeni, a Japanese trading company. The Japanese food processing companies have moved to China, and then Marubeni imports soy from the USA and Brazil directly to China, and then Marubeni sells products from China to the world. The greed for soy never ends. The latest soy project is ProSavanna, which is done by the government of Japan, Brazil, and Mozambique. It is a project of land grabbing that expel peasants. The struggle to stop this project has been mobilized by the people in these 3 countries. Domestic rural development and these devastating international mega soy development projects in Brazil and Mozambique are 2 faces of the same icon, same coin. Without changing them, we cannot win in a real sense. But we have already solutions: agroecology and food sovereignty based on local family farms. Mobilize locally, mobilize municipality works quite well, but we do need international solidarity. We are facing the crisis of the 6 mass extinction, climate disaster, and pandemic. We need a paradigm shift from industrial agriculture to agroecology. Let's transform the global food production into the local food system. Mintoken, based in Tochigi, Japan, has developed organic rice farming without hard efforts to weed killings, which gave great success in Japan and also in Bhutan. Greater harvest with fewer efforts. We have already solutions. We don't need GMOs or gene-edited crops because the existing advanced organic farming methods can feed us all. And with that method, we can avoid environmental and social catastrophe. Thank you.
Now we will shift to the Latin America, and we'll have 3 cases from Mexico, Venezuela, and Brazil. And the next speaker will be Claudia, and she's from the Barter community, Mixiuhca and Ecomun Network, Mexico. She is activist for solidarity, economy, and communitarian money. And she is also founder of the multi-record Mixiuhca network. She is also coordinator of the Little School of the Network, Dialogue, and she is member of Ecosystemic Dialogues. Please, Claudia.
So thank you very much, Jade and Kinchi, for organizing this forum and all the team with you. I'm really very glad to listen all the discussion from many college teachers and friends. So thank you. Well, we are witness to the catastrophe that capital's extractive ambition makes on the planet. The land erosion, air pollution, disruption of water cycles, and the social consequence that this implies, like the extreme economic inequality, the insecurity, the forced migration, and so on, many problems that we have discussed in this forum. But, well, I have to talk about the challenge and the alternatives that we have as communities and grassroots initiatives. So I would like to start with some of the problems in Mexico. 7 of 10 rivers are polluted in my country, and 2/3 of watersheds are polluted too. 30% of our territory is being exploited by mining companies, while the 90% of the country is deforested. Also, we have wonderful, highly biodiverse jungles, such as the Lacandona jungle or the Chimalapas jungle in the south of Mexico. They are in constant threat. Of course, indigenous and rural communities, with the support of part of the civil society, are defending their territory. For example, the last virgin jungle in Mexico, the Chimalapas, in the state of Oaxaca. There, the ethnic groups are constantly struggling with mining companies and timber companies, are struggling against the invasion of foreign cattle and agribusiness and drug traffickers. And also they are resisting two mega projects, the Maya train and the corridor isthmus of Tehuantepec, which these two mega projects will not only affect the highly biodiverse of the ecosystems in the south of Mexico, but also threaten the cultural practice that have proven to be the most efficient in food sovereignty and caring for the nature. There is a lot of propaganda from the mass media, the government, and even some universities justifying large capital investment for the sake of the progress. The current financial system is created in order to destroy the planet and the people's lives. Huge amount of money are needed to finance mining companies, these mega projects, and this disastrous investment is justified by mass media, who repeat and repeat and repeat that private investment is necessary for the country's growth. But in fact, this kind of investment of money are used to extract wealth from the nature or to exploit the population of a region. Well, another big problem that we face and that I want to share with you is the insecurity. And a painful problem is the femicides. The femicides are alarming. 9 women are killed every day in my country. Given this problem, on March of this year, there were large demonstrations of women all over the country. Thousands and thousands of young and old women went out to the street to say, "Not one more, not one dead more woman." And well, that was a very important demonstration. In the other hand, but also talking about insecurity, 15 years ago, the old government started a war against the drug traffickers, which has put us in a dangerous situation with more than 30,000 disappeared. Well, and finally, to finish this little context, we are starting in a deep economic crisis. Statements from international organizations say that Latin America will be a very affected region. Millions of people will find themselves in poverty to the point that they will not have enough to eat. There will be hunger. And the unacceptable thing is that people will not have hunger for the lack of food, but for the lack of money. And I think this is unacceptable. Well, I think the more dangerous idea today in my country is the idea of return to a normality. In Mexico, the government started talking of return of a new normality. But our normality was that half of the territory had been taken by organized crime. The normality is the dispossession of the territory of indigenous people and peasants for mega projects. So we can't return to this normality. I think the only reasonable thing to do in such alarming situation is to deconstruct, to transform the rationality that put us in this situation. The money as the center of the life, the imperative of economic gain, the search for power, the ambition to possess. I think today the biggest task that we have is pedagogical and also epistemological, is to find a new way to perceive ourselves as humanity, moving from resistance to re-existence. And in this sense, I want to share with you three characteristics that I want to highlight, because this characteristic has been very important in our experience, in our practice. One of them is the feminist point of view. The feminist view in Mexico is underscored by indigenous movement and multiplied by young women in the cities. There are many cooperatives and groups of health, dress, foods, farming, and so on, mainly promoted by women. We have discussed a lot about how to decolonize the feminist movement. The Zapatistas women have called large meeting to reflect on feminism from our own places. And of course, we also have in common a lot of topics. For example, put the life at the center. It's something that we repeat either by demanding that there be no more dead women, or when we talk about not allowing more exploitation in our territories. The women practice an economy of caring for the nature and for the people. And by focusing on care, it seeks to satisfy specific needs of daily life, such as security, education, culture, housing, transport, health, and food. So the feminist point of view focuses on material things of daily life and therefore is closer to the nature, but also consider the vulnerability of human beings, and that's why it can give importance to values such as care and mutual help, and make that values a new way of doing politics that considers the body and things like the love. Well, the second characteristic that I want to share with you is the ecosystemic approach. When I say ecosystem, I also could say territory. The ecosystem is the land, but also the water, the air, the people that are organized. The ecosystem is a place where the community live. And the awareness that life depends on a narrow and harmonious relationship between all the beings that inhabit this ecosystem. It's a complex organization of different beings which keep a relationship of interdependence. And this is a very important concept for us, because we think that we are interdependence between people and eco-dependence of the nature. So it's to discover the singularity of the beings that implies the complementarity. So an ecosystem is not homogeneous and static. Quite the opposite, is diverse and is in constant movement. To talk about ecosystem is to talk about how to inhabit the planet. It's a new form of inhabiting where the being is a common being in movement and transformation. What I really want to say is that for us, the new political subject is not the person. It could be the ecosystem. So in this new living, in this new political subject, is not anthropocentric, is not competitive, and is not patriarchal. Well, and finally, the last community practice that I think is very important for us is the sharing. I have practiced and studied community currencies for 15 years. And we know that we have to change the capitalist logic in the relationships of the people. And sharing is a transformative force. And it is only possible to face the hostile paradigm of the capitalist market with a tender paradigm of giving the best of each one. In Mexico, this practice is rooted by indigenous people. It's a practice based in the virtuous cycle of give, receive, and return. Members of an indigenous community offer their time, their work, their harvest to the community, knowing that if all members do so, they will also receive from others. And this receiving from others commits them to return again, and so on. A characteristic important of this kind of practice, it is lack of mathematical calculation. What is offered does not count, but it is appreciated. It is more valuable. So we propose to recover this sharing of indigenous community, but resignifying it and give it relevance as a transformative practice. Sharing is a relationship between people, not only a simple exchange of objects. That generates a common consciousness. It generates a value similar to friendship. And well, in Mexican, we have many examples of this kind of practice, and has teach us that sharing is this experience of being together and feeling of a communion. It's the recognition of a common based on empathy, and thus empathy allows the existence of a profound sense of reciprocity. So I think this kind of practice allowed us to create new kinds of economies, new kinds of politics, more autonomous, rooted in every territory, and with bonds of respect and understanding. So all of we are creating different ways of understanding the world, different community practice, but also we are facing the most aberrant ideologies. So I think we must be aware that the future of humanity is in the game of these encounters of the different ways of understanding the world, in the different intentions, wills, and power strategies. So that's why I want to close my participation with a quote of Francisco Varela. He is a Chilean biologist, and he said that the intelligence is no longer the ability to solve a problem, it's the ability to create a shared world. And I truly believe that every action, every practice have to be done in a deep awareness of caring for life.
Thank you very much, Claudia. And you try to draw our attentions to the important elements of ecology, and also to have a self-understanding, and also reach out to build a relationship with the others, particularly how to improve or readjust the community relationships. And similar to the Tomoya, also to draw our attention to the importance of agroecology. That means how to readjust our relations with the to the nature and also with the communities. So next speaker will be Hernan Vargas from Venezuela. And Vargas is the member of the ALBA movement secretariat and responsible of political articulation and international solidarity. And she is the member of the political coordination of Urban People's Movement, and he is experienced in political education for territorial planning and organizative community building. Thank you, Hernan.
Thank you. Thank you for the invitation and greeting for everyone who's participating in this 7th South Forum. And of course, uh, uh, big greeting and reconnaissance for you, for Kinchi, and the whole staff that is making this discussion possible in a moment where it's quite important to have discussions between the Global South. So I want to share some ideas for discussion this your morning, my night. Um, One of them is the first one is about we think that actually this moment is a civilizatory crisis of capital, and actually the COVID-19 has been a trigger for this crisis. It has exposed the principal crisis, which is the contradiction between this civilizatory model and life. The reproduction of this civilizatory model is against life, and that's something that you can see in this moment very transparent way. You have the United States of America supposed to be the most prepared country for attend such a crisis like this, like a pandemic, but in the numbers is the first country in the world with more contagions and more deaths, and that's basically the because that's the system. The civilizatory model, it's about reproduction of capital. It's not about to protect life. So that's quite important to see. The second issue that I want to talk is that in that context, Venezuela has feel the consequences of this crisis, but also of a second crisis, which is the crisis of the imperialist crisis. It's a crisis of the hegemony of the United States, which has expressions at this moment. You can see that during the pandemic, this crisis has increased the offensive from the United States. Like, for example, the Cold War against China. It's part of this attempt of the United States to preserve his global hegemony. And in that sense, I want to emphasize that in Venezuela, it translates into a blockade, escalate of sanctions that has begun from 2013. Since 2013, we have something like 140 different acts of executive orders from the United States in order to sanction Venezuela, specifically in topics like it sanctions any financial institution that tries to give credit or debt relation with Venezuela, but also sanctions any enterprise which or country who try to bring any shipment with meals or medicine or fuel or any other good for consumption or goods of capital. And also these sanctions affect the reserves, the international reserves of the country. Last week, we have seen how the one bank in UK took control of the reserves of Venezuela in that country, and that's some kind of expressions of this. But I want to emphasize two things in there. By one hand, it isn't just a thing of Venezuela, because we can see that it actually happens with Cuba and with Nicaragua. The strategy is the same. They are trying to force an overthrow of a social transformation government. But also you can see in the whole world. And I want to emphasize that the foreign policy of the United States at this moment is really based on sanctions. You have 40 different countries that are sanctioned at this time by the United States. But that's just not about the state nations. It's also about different enterprises. Like, for example, in Europe, you have like a lot of enterprises sanctions by the by the gas distribution issue. In this Cold War, if you can call it like that, with Russia by the distribution of gas. So I want to emphasize that thing like an important crisis for this moment, the imperialist crisis. Then specifically in Venezuela, I have to say there will be, as Kimchi mentioned before, the 16th July, there will be a special session on Venezuela. But I just want to mention that this imperialist crisis and these sanctions has, as a result, as one of the results, you have like an important attack from the mainstream. You have dollarization of economy as a way of attack, but also military attempt and menace threats against Venezuela. In the last 2 months ago, there has been an attempt of military invasion with a cell, maybe like Bay of Pigs, Bahía de Cochinos in Cuba, some decades ago. And specifically, these sanctions have decreased the capacity of Bolivarian revolution of guarantee the material conditions of life for the most of the population. In 2013, we had an oil income of $42 billion. The last year, in 2019, we had an oil income of 4.2 billion. So it's an important decrease that has, of course, his goal is to achieve the internal collapse. And in that matter, I want to introduce the next issue, which is about, I was speaking last year in the previous South-South Forum about the communal way in Venezuela as a path that has built different organization tissues in the communities, in the ground, in the territories, that has allowed to develop a new possibility, alternatives from there. And at that point, I told you that those accumulation of organization tissues are the one that were confronting the current crisis. At that last year, we didn't have COVID in the scene, but at this point, we have that these tissues are actually facing the crisis. I wanna emphasize in five of them. One of them are the communal care, the community care that you are seeing in different urban communities, in urban communes, where you see a lot of people organize in order to prevent the contagion of the COVID. They're actually suing different the curfews, but also with collective washing equipments journeys between the whole people, and also a lot of testing with the people that is suspected of contagion. Venezuela so far has 1.3 million of tests at this day. So it's one of the highest in the region. The second thing that I want to share about this communal dynamics is the gender defense. As Claudia mentioned before, we have an important increase of gender violence in the whole region and in the whole globe. But in Venezuela, you see like the organized women organizations and feminist organizations are trying to promote campaigns in order to denounce this violence, in order to pressure the state to apply the law in those cases, as well as femicides, as violence gender case. So I think it's quite important too. The third thing, it's about the border system of care. At this moment, we have a reverse migration. So far, we have nearby 80,000 persons that have returned in the last months since the starting of the pandemic. Basically, by the corona shock, as my friend BJ said, is like the crisis of this coronavirus, which triggers the whole neoliberalism, and a lot of people get without work, without medical care, and they came back. So in the borders, you see hundreds of points of integral assistance where you can have medical workers, joining community organizations and social movements, and also military force in order to establish a protocol of attention, detention, and then have them in quarantine, give them accommodations with the proper meal, with the proper treatment, and at the end of the quarantine, the proper test. So thinking that with 80,000 person is like a big operation. Maybe not for China, but for us, it's quite important. Then the first one is about the family agriculture. During this time, we have seen in Venezuela how most of the village, how most of our country actually is feeding by the little peasants and family agriculture. And that's important to position it because the neoliberal rationality tries to undermine this and try to say that it's marginal expressions are good practice but not important in the market, that actually is the agro-industrial complex which guarantees food for the people. But that's not actually true. And we are in the challenge of positioning the magnitude of this. And then the fifth one is about the people networks, which is linked also to the little networks of peasants and little producers and rural communities that start to link with urban communities in order to establish a process of exchange without intermediaries, direct exchange. The urban communities start a process of organizing the consumption and planning the collective consumption. So that's quite important too. And I mentioned these 5 examples because I think they are actually expressions of the accumulation of people's power that actually confront in the moment of crisis. Of course, they have a lot of constraints during the crisis, like for example, the difficulties to access to the fuel. At this moment, we have a few problems. Basically, by one thing that I think that it's important to mention, that is what I mentioned as a colonial crisis. In this region, Venezuela as well, we have a dependency system that has been built for the whole country. The whole economies have been molded in order to contribute to the global system of accumulation. So we have a double task of contributing with common nature, but also with financialization, which is another proper process of extraction. It's not just extraction of nature, it's also extraction of value by different ways. And financialization, it's kind of quite important in this. So in that matter, I want to enter in the third issue, which is the common challenges that we have from Venezuela, but I think that are common in the region and even in the global south. One of them is the necessity of decolonize politics. I think that Claudia also refers that, which is about to rethinking the politics, because the situation is actually telling us that we can't transcend the crisis of the capitalism, which is exposed with the COVID, only by trying to restructure the economy. This system is built in order to reproduce capital. It's not about reproduce life. So we have to deconstruct. We need to rethink our thinking in politics, and also most of the theses that we have had since the past century, where we think that when we go to the government, we are taking the power. The power is more than the power of institutions. That's an important issue in the power, but we have more than that. We gotta think in another kind of development pattern, which is about reproduction of life and not reproduction of capital. And in that matter, we need to build the new institutions in order to promote this new system. In that matter, I think that it's important to emphasize the communal way into a new society. In Venezuela, we call this alternative socialism, but in Mexico, as Claudia told us, they call it different, and Bolivia, they call it well-being. But it's about to think in the way of the commons, the unity of the commons, in order to conquer the means to reproduce the common things, the life. And in that matter, we need to establish that as a political way for transformation. The other issue that I want to emphasize is about the issue of contradictions. I think that in the different left sectors that we have in our region, it's important to start to discuss about that thing that Mao calls the proper attention of contradictions. We have a lot of contradictions that are actually beyond us. Maybe most of the time, we think, for example, that we have binary decisions, and we think that we have neoliberal path or socialism or revolutionary path. And actually, we have more complex situation in our region. For example, who can think that we got socialism in Argentina? But it's important to stop the elite government of Mauricio Macri that has ruled 4 years for the last 4 years. And when we change into Cristina Fernandez, we are actually advancing in another kind of contradiction level. So I think that it's important to see that we have contradictions against imperialism, but also contradictions against the civilizatory model of capital. And it has like a lot of series of different contradictions that I want to close with 2 ideas, which is one of our friends from Bolivia, Juan Jose Bautista, tell us that we need to amplify the category frame to understand, to interpret the reality, to interpret the reality, and also to transform it. So we need to complex our frame of analysis. And in that way, I want to contribute with this decolonized politics, but also the communal way into socialism. But in that matter, the last thing I want to emphasize is the necessity of building people's unity blocks. We need to build people's platform, people's unity process that allow us to face the different contradictions, the different challenge that we have at this moment. I want to emphasize, for example, the example of the Argentinian people that 4 years ago they said it doesn't matter if it wins the center left or the right, the ultra right. It will be the same. We will have neoliberalism. And after 4 years, they said they learned from that process and they said, no, these people actually exacerbate and increase the contradictions and against the people. So we need to overthrow this. And they put together the whole campaigns of feminists, the whole campaigns and struggles of workers, the whole campaigns of the peasants, the whole campaigns of most of the people, and they build a common sense. And they said, our first goal is to defeat the ultra-right in these elections. That means to achieve the power, that means to achieve revolution? No. But it's quite important to give that kind of steps as a block of the peoples. I think that actually is kind of the same strategy that our friends in Brazil, that our friend Jana will tell us before, which is about to make a whole front of the peoples in order to go for Bolsonaro and then pass to another level of contradictions that we have to confront from the peoples. And I think that it's important to think that it's struggles in the national level, but also struggles in the regional level, because we have to think that the regional integration, it's important to confront this civilizatory crisis of capital. We have, for example, we can confront the blockades without international unity. And that's not only a problem of governments, that's also a problem of the peoples so far. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Hernan. And you present how the Venezuela community struggle with the sanctions and also their resilience and also resistant to this kind of difficulties, including the COVID-19. And as you mentioned, so how can we recognize the people's forces or from below and try to organize? So this is also a kind of, within this kind of difficult times, is also opportunities for the mass mobilization and to get more people be involved in this process of repoliticalization. So the next speaker will be from MST, the Landless Workers Movement in Brazil. And the speakers is the Janailson ALMEIDA. And he comes from a peasant family from Northeast Brazil. And he is also militant of the MST. MST has 35 years old of social movement in Brazil that struggle for the land grant reform by poor peasants. And they also look for the social changes and in transition, help the society in transition to socialism. We also have later we have a discussion about the what means the socialism in the 21st century. But anyway, Jana also got his degree in agroecology from the State University of Paraíba, and also got his master in territory development to Latin America and Caribbean in the Geography Department of State University of São Paulo. He's also now, he is living in Shanghai, China now. He's an internationalist militant to help the exchange program with China and Brazil. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Let me try to share my screen here. Good morning, everybody. Nice to see you here. Nice to share with you. I'm gonna talk a little bit about our experience with the MST in Brazil. You see my screen? Is it right?
Yes.
Good. The whole screen? Okay. Let's talk a little bit about the MST and our experience in Brazil. I'm very glad to be here sharing this space with you. Very important debate through the Forum of Sustainability. I have been followed the discussions on Friday night and yesterday night. Very good discussions, and very excited about the people and the discussions that took place here and has been sharing in this forum. The MST, I believe that most of you know about the MST. We have basically three great principles, which is access to land and agrarian reform and socialism in Brazil. And I'm gonna share with you a little bit about especially this period of pandemic and how we have organized our struggle in Brazil. I'd like to start with this point. I think it has been discussed during the forum in another conference and from very specialist people that talked about covering the contradictions and crises. But we'd like to say the COVID-19 pandemic deepened the structural crisis of capitalist system. And we know the crisis is not from the pandemic. The crisis, the capitalist society was already in crisis since long term, and not just an economic crisis, but also social crisis, political, and now we could say cultural crisis and environmental crisis. And as we have been discussed, the capitalist system and its economy cannot respond to the crisis. It's much clearer now with the COVID pandemic. Next, Claudia and Hernan already talked about their experience of resistance in Mexico and Venezuela, and we could say only the organized people in their territories are going to be able to find out the solutions for the problems caused by capitalist exploitation. When we say territory, we are talking about any territory. The peripheries of big cities are a very important territory where we have many communities struggling for their rights and so on. But I'd like to be to keep to this topic, to this point, where I'm gonna talk in a little bit about the organization of our communities in Brazil. And to this moment, I wanna show, I wanna talk about 3 great lines of organization from our movement in Brazil. The first one is about our political organization and struggle. Since the occupation of land, which is our burning, to encampments and settlements, we have a big process of organization of people to struggle, and without this process would be very difficult to have our solutions in our struggle and find out our path to access land and to agrarian reform in our struggle for social transformation. And the second one is about food production, which is basically what we do in our communities, encampments and settlements. But when we say food production, we are not talking about just the process of producing food, but thinking how are we gonna be able to produce healthy food to the whole society. We have a big deal to building up our project of agriculture based on agroecology, food, healthy food to our society, to our people, to our community, and to our country. The third one is our collective process of organization in the communities. I'm talking about infrastructure, our collective spaces sharing, co-ops, agro-industry, and our collective land and our collective life, since schools, health posts, and different spaces in our community we share among the whole people, among all. And when we say schools, for example, we are talking about different levels of education process. And that's the 3 great lines we can say we work in our communities. Next, I bring here a kind of concept of agroecology. It's basically a thinking from MST and La Via Campesina, which we could say agroecology is a set of agricultural practices and techniques that respect human and also human-nature relationships to protect natural resource and promote equal work. It is the technological and productive foundation for the peasant way of life, in the sense of guaranteeing food sovereignty. I'd like to call your attention a little bit to these ideas, to this thinking of agroecology. When agroecology is our project of agriculture against the model, the destructive model of agribusiness in Brazil, Mr. Tomoya has been talking about very good before, in a very good way. And this is the foundation, because it's our base. Our project of agriculture is our base, is our big principle, and it's about our way of life. And it's productive, because when we are talking about production of food, we are saying our big deal is produce food not just to our societies or to community, to our communities or a group of people, but to the whole society. And that's our big deal. This project needs to be productive in this way. And it's also technological, because agroecology is not an old model of agriculture that people use old techniques and like that. Agroecology is a project of agriculture which also think about how is going on the process of science and technology development. And we talk about not only safety food, but food sovereignty to the whole people. So that's fast explanation, but I like to get to next step and talk a little bit about our recent process of building a plan, emergency plan of agrarian reform due to the pandemic, based on 4 main points. The first one is the access to land and work. Right now we are talking about 40% of people in Brazil amid the pandemic without a regular work job. And it's very worrying in this moment to our society. We are saying the government needs to demarcate or make the demarcation of indigenous and quilombolas territories and put on our way the process of expropriation of land to the peasantry. These people need to access land to produce food to the society. The second point is about production of healthy food. I already have talked about that. And to do that, we need credit, we need financing, we need public policies to support our process of food production. And the third one is about protection of nature, water, and biodiversity. And when we are talking about this point, it's very important to figure out that we are saying we need to have a good use of natural resource and think this resource to develop the economy and the society to the whole people, not to capitalist profits. That's the problem. When we think seeds, Mr. Tomoya talking about that, seeds need to be good to the humanity, not a property to capitalist profit. That's what we need to talk about. And finally, to this part, guarantee dignified life to people, not just in the countryside, but also in the cities. And especially in this last period, amid the pandemic, we have been working on building up campaigns to support people from in the peripheries of cities that are in a difficult situation, and I'm gonna be next to this point to finally in my discussion. Right now we have been building a solidarity campaign. I mean, during the pandemic of COVID-19, especially thinking from this thinking of Fidel Castro, our commander-in-chief in Cuba Revolution. He said, solidarity is not giving what we have left, but sharing what we have. And that what it is what the MST has been doing during the last months, basically, and I'm gonna fastly talk about this. The first one is the campaign We Need Everybody, and we have been going to the peripheries of big cities like São Paulo and many others in Brazil to talk with people about to discuss the capitalist crisis and to donate food and create relationship with these people to build our project together. The MST has a national network of popular health that attend communities, not just during the pandemic, but since many times before. And right now they are especially attending the communities that have more needs, necessities. A solidarity meal program. The MST has donated more than 1,500 tons of food and has distributed more than 70,000 lunch boxes, and also producing masks and alcohol and so on. Also, this donation of agrarian reform products, that's a very important thing right now, because campments and settlements from MST donate tons of food to people who live in a big city's periphery in a difficult situation, and those people support the MST before in our struggling. Right now we are trying to help them also to access food, especially in this difficult time of pandemic. Also, our Expressão Popular, our publisher, has been donating books with food, to think reading is also a way to feed yourself. And organization of volunteers, civilians, and also many other movements from Brazilian fronts has been joining to the solidarity campaign. And other campaigns have been taking place in Brazil, and one is called Living Periphery, many movements, many people involved, and other one called Hands in Solidarity, which is very important process right now also. I'd like to to end my presentations so far with this saying from our movement: if the countryside doesn't plant, the city won't die. Se o campo não planta, a cidade não janta. We say in the MST in Brazil. I'm very glad to share with you. Thanks so much, and I end here.
Yeah.
So far.
Thank you very much, Jenna. And from MNC case, we find that it's very important to have access to land and also to protect the small peasantry system. And when we also have a similar case in China, because we have the land revolution in 1949, and then the majority of the peasant has their own land and housings. So when compared with the urban China, the confronted case in rural China is less than the urban China. So I think this is also important to stress, to emphasize again the importance of agrarian reform